All right, ready to dive deep again? You guys sent in some really interesting research on immigration.
This is going to be a good one.
It is. But, and here's the twist, it's not just about the economics this time. We're going deeper. Like, how does immigration actually affect how people feel, their well-being?
And get this, national identity plays a huge role. Who knew?
Right. Totally unexpected. We've got two great sources lined up. One's this big picture overview of global migration trends and policies.
From the International Journal of Applied Research in Social Sciences.
Yeah, that one. And the other one, a fascinating UK study. Can't wait to dig into that.
It's a good one, trust me.
I believe you. So let's start broad. This first article, it reminds us that migration is like this global dance.
People moving all over the place for all sorts of reasons.
Exactly. We're talking economic opportunities, fleeing from political chaos, even climate change pushing people to new lands.
It's a crazy mix of factors.
It is. And this is where it gets complicated, right? Because different regions, they're dealing with totally unique challenges.
The article, it highlights this really well with the African Union. They're walking a tightrope,
Trying to balance.
trying to balance their economic needs with humanitarian concerns. Like, how do you address the root causes of migration?
Poverty, conflict.
Exactly. But then also manage the flow of people across borders in a humane way.
Wow.
It's a tough one.
Delicate, to say the least. And speaking of complex situations,
Hmm.
the article, it shifts gears to the U.S.
Which, let's be honest, has a very long and complicated history with immigration.
An understatement. But it's gotten even more, I don't know, layered in recent times, wouldn't you say?
Absolutely. The U.S. immigration system, it's trying to juggle so many things at once. Family reunification, attracting skilled workers, providing refuge for asylum seekers.
Talk about a balancing act.
It's like spinning plates, honestly. Trying to keep everything steady while also facing pressure from, economic anxieties, security concerns. It's a lot.
It really highlights how much context matters. And that's where our second piece of research comes in. This UK study, GPAC 045.pdf, totally different direction. Buckle up.
Yeah, this one throws you for a loop.
It does. Get this, it actually moves beyond those typical debates about jobs and wages.
The usual suspects.
Right. Instead, it focuses on something way more personal, how immigration affects the well-being of people already living in the UK.
Their happiness, their mental health.
Yeah.
What researchers call subjective well-being.
So we're getting into the emotional side of immigration now. That's new. Tell me more.
It is, and it gets even more interesting when the study digs into how people identify with their nation.
Okay, how so?
It looks at two types of national identity, ethnic and civic.
Those sound a bit academic. Break those down for me.
Sure, so ethnic national identity, think of it like feeling connected to your roots, shared ancestry, heritage, where your family came from, all those traditions.
Okay, get it. Like deep-seated identity.
Exactly. Civic national identity is a little different. It's less about where you come from and more about your beliefs. Shared values, respect for laws and institutions, the things that, tie citizens together.
Gotcha. So in the UK, the study uses English and British as examples of this, right?
Right. Like, identifying as English might mean a stronger connection to that long family history in England, that shared heritage, while identifying as British might mean, prioritizing their belief in British laws and values, shared citizenship.
Two sides of the same coin. Both about national pride, but in different ways.
Exactly.
So where does immigration fit into all of this?
Here's where it gets really interesting. They found that increased immigration actually led to a decrease in well-being, but only for people who strongly identified as English.
Wait, so you're saying being around more immigrants actually made some people feel worse? But why? I'd think it would be the opposite, like feeling economically threatened or something.
It's a common assumption, but the study, it flips the script. It all goes back to this idea of identity economics. Our identities, they're deeply connected to our sense of self-worth, our sense of belonging.
Okay, but how does that translate to feeling worse about immigration?
Well, for someone with a strong ethnic identity in this case, identifying as English, being around more people they see as different, as outgroups, it can be unsettling, even if there's no direct economic harm.
It's more about what? Like their sense of belonging being threatened.
Exactly. Like their group is somehow becoming smaller or less significant.
Wow. So it's not even about actual competition, but a perceived threat to their identity?
You got it. And here's the kicker. For those who strongly identified as British, immigration had little to no effect on their well-being. Some even reported slightly positive feelings.
Wow, okay, that contrast is really striking.
Right. It shows just how powerful and how complex this link between identity and immigration can be.
Mind blown. And we're just getting started. We've got people feeling uneasy, others unfazed. It makes you wonder if this is part of why immigration is such a hot-button issue everywhere.
Absolutely. That's what makes this research so important. It shines a light on these hidden psychological and social factors, adds a whole new layer to how we understand these reactions.
And it makes you appreciate this deep dive approach even more. If we were just skimming the surface, we'd miss all these nuances, but we're not stopping there. Give me the nitty-gritty details. How big of an impact are we talking about?
All right, so get this. For some people, the emotional impact of immigration was almost two-thirds as strong as going through a divorce.
Divorce. Whoa, okay. That puts things in perspective.
Right. It's a big deal. The study found that for the English group, the well-being decrease linked to a mean level increase in immigration. That's their fancy way of saying the average change they observed was a whopping 61% of the impact of going through a divorce.
61%. So for some people, experiencing a certain level of immigration around them is almost as emotionally challenging as ending a marriage.
Exactly. It's a powerful way to think about it.
Hmm.
And in stark contrast, the same increase for those in the British group had a minimal impact, like only 10%, or even a slightly positive impact, depending on the specific measure.
Wow. I'm really starting to see how much weight identity carries in all of this. But this isn't just some abstract academic exercise, is it? This study, they took these findings a step further and looked at how these different identities played out in the real world, right? Like with the 2016 Brexit vote.
You're right. They wanted to see if these differences in how people identify nationally, if they actually translated into different behaviors, different choices. And the Brexit vote, that was the perfect example.
The Brexit vote. That was the UK deciding to leave the European Union, right?
Yeah.
What does that have to do with immigration and identity?
Well, one of the biggest arguments during that whole Brexit campaign was this idea of, quote, taking back control of the UK's borders, which basically meant having more say over immigration. The researchers wanted to see if this focus on immigration landed differently depending on how people saw themselves, nationally speaking.
Okay, so did they find any connections there between national identity and how people voted?
They did. And the results were pretty much in line with the well-being findings. Remember how the English group, those more focused on heritage and ancestry, how they experienced those negative well-being effects from increased immigration?
Yeah, like they felt their group was being diluted a little.
Precisely. And it turns out those same English identifiers, they were way more likely to vote in favor of leaving the EU. Significantly more likely, actually, compared to those who identified as British.
Okay, so that tracks with the whole taking back control of immigration thing, right? They felt strongly, so they voted for it.
Mhm.
It's almost like the whole Brexit vote was a referendum on, I don't know, how people felt about their national identity being challenged, at least in part.
It's definitely a compelling argument. This research suggests that for some people, that desire to control immigration, it might come from a much deeper place, a place where their sense of belonging, their very identity feels threatened.
Wow. Talk about a complex issue. But this definitely gives us a lot to think about. So where do we go from here? We've got this new understanding of immigration, identity, well-being.
Mhm.
Now what?
That's the million-dollar question, right? How do we use this information to create policies that actually work for everyone? And it's not about dismissing those concerns about identity. It's about understanding them and finding ways to build a more inclusive society.
Okay, so you're saying we can't just ignore these feelings of unease, even if we don't personally relate. We have to actually, like, bridge that gap somehow.
Exactly. And it starts by acknowledging that there are anxieties at play here, legitimate anxieties about change, about identity, about what it even means to belong in a society that's constantly evolving.
It's like that saying, the only constant is change. But change can be scary, especially when it feels like it's threatening something as fundamental as your sense of self.
And that's where things get really interesting from a policy perspective. How do we create a society where everyone feels like they belong, regardless of their background, how they identify? It's a challenge. A lot of nations are struggling with this.
For sure. And we're seeing all these different approaches. Some countries, they focus on assimilation, like encouraging immigrants to adopt the dominant culture. Others are more about multiculturalism. Right. Celebrating diversity and difference.
And both approaches have their strengths and weaknesses, right? Assimilation can lead to a sense of unity, But it can also mean losing those unique cultural traditions that make us who we are. And then on the flip side, multiculturalism, yeah, it celebrates diversity, but it can sometimes lead to communities living like parallel lives, not really connecting.
Trying to find that sweet spot
Mhm.
between blending in and standing out.
Mhm.
How do you create a society where everyone feels like they're part of the same tapestry, but you're still respecting and valuing those individual threads?
It's the million-dollar question, and there's no one-size-fits-all answer. But this research, it gives us some clues. Like, it suggests that we need to move beyond just the economic arguments, the ones about GDP and job creation. Those are important, of course,
Right.
but they don't address the whole picture.
Because telling someone who feels like their identity is under attack that immigration is good for the economy, you're not going to change their mind
Yeah.
or make them feel any less anxious.
Exactly. We need to go deeper, address those underlying social and psychological needs. And that requires a more, I don't know, nuanced approach and an empathetic one for sure.
So where do we even begin? What would what'd you call it, a more human-centered approach to immigration even look like?
Well, it starts by listening to a diversity of voices and perspectives. We've heard from those who feel like their identities are threatened, but we also need to hear from immigrants themselves, their experiences, their hopes, what they're going through.
Because in the end of the day, it's about people,
Yeah.
right? Not just numbers on a spreadsheet.
100%. And that leads us to another key insight: successful integration. It's a two-way street. It's not just about immigrants adapting to a new culture, it's also about the receiving society being open to change and adaptation too.
So it's about creating a space where everyone feels like they can bring their whole selves to the table without feeling like they have to erase or deny parts of who they are.
Exactly. It's about fostering a sense of belonging that includes both shared values and individual differences. And that takes work. Ongoing dialogue, understanding, willingness to challenge our own biases.
It's about recognizing that diversity isn't a threat to unity. It's actually essential to building a stronger, more vibrant society.
Couldn't have said it better myself. It's about embracing that beautiful tapestry of human experience, with all its complexities and contradictions.
And that's a powerful message, especially in a world that feels so divided these days. So where do we go from here? How do we actually put these ideas into practice?
That's what we'll explore in the final part of our deep dive. Stay tuned, because we're about to unpack some potential solutions. Explore how we can create a more inclusive and welcoming world for everyone.
Okay, so we've covered a ton of ground, haven't we? We started with this UK study, right? The one that found immigration can actually impact well-being in these really surprising ways.
Mm.
And it's all tied to how people see their own national identity.
Super fascinating stuff.
Totally. But then we zoomed out, looked at how different countries are trying to find that balance, between assimilation and multiculturalism. And it seems like there's no easy answer.
It's the million-dollar question, isn't it? How do you create a sense of unity while also honoring all that diversity? It's tricky, but the research does give us a framework, right? It reminds us to go beyond the economics and think about those deeper needs, the social and psychological stuff.
Right, because telling someone, hey, immigration is good for the economy while they're feeling like their whole identity is being threatened, not super helpful.
Exactly. We got to address those root concerns, those feelings of unease, the uncertainty.
So how do we do that? Where do we even begin?
Well, one idea that keeps coming up is fostering a strong sense of shared identity.
Shared identity, but not in a way that erases individual cultures.
Right. Not about erasing anything. It's more about emphasizing those common values, shared goals, that sense of belonging to something bigger than yourself.
Finding that common ground.
Exactly. And that can look like a lot of different things. It could mean encouraging more civic engagement, creating opportunities for people from different backgrounds to connect and work together. Maybe it's strengthening the social safety net so everyone feels supported no matter what.
So everyone feels like they have a stake in things.
Yes. And it's not just about big policy changes either. It's about those everyday interactions that can break down barriers, promoting intercultural dialogue, supporting community initiatives, things like that.
Because sometimes just getting to know someone different than you,
Yeah.
sharing a meal, hearing their story, that's what changes things.
It's powerful. And we also need a system that actually supports integration, right? Give newcomers the tools to thrive.
So things like access to language classes,
Yeah,
job
and-
training, making sure everyone has a decent place to live.
Exactly. Remove those barriers, because when everyone has the opportunity to participate in society, everyone benefits.
It makes the whole tapestry stronger,
Yeah.
more resilient, more creative.
100%. It enriches us. It challenges us to grow. So as we kind of wrap up this deep dive, I think the biggest takeaway is this. Building a truly inclusive society, it's a team effort. We have to understand how economics, psychology, and identity all work together.
It's about recognizing those anxieties, but not letting them control us.
Yes, it's about finding that sweet spot where we celebrate our differences, but also recognize our shared humanity.
And I think ultimately that's what it's all about.
Absolutely. And immigration, it's part of that story. It's about resilience, about connecting with each other, about building a better future for ourselves and for everyone who comes after us.
So on that note, we'll leave you with this. What can you do? What steps, big or small, can you take to create more understanding, more belonging in your own community? Because real change starts with us.
Well said.
Thanks for joining us for this deep dive. We'll see you next time.